Thanks for coming back. Today is part two. We're going to look at making the guard and the handle for this gorgeous CuMai knife. We're going to do it out of copper so that everything matches. And I've got this acrylic that's black with flashes of copper and silver. We started off with this blade. I love the way it turned out. So let's look at how we start putting a handle on this beast. I'm going to start off with a bar of copper and we'll drill some holes so that we can actually start milling the slot for the guard. I'm using a centering bit and the mill table to just make sure it's all perfectly in line. That way we get no wobble. You can see I tried once up top and it failed. Now we use the end mill to finish it off. I found I don't like copper. It tends to grab the end mill and it's probably due to my mill speed. I wish I was more experienced. If anybody knows what I should be running for speed, let me know for copper. Then it's over to the files again. I always find I have to file this in close. If you look at the file I'm using though, you'll see that I've actually ground off the sides. So one, it's a little bit narrower, but two, as I'm filing, I'm not actually making the slot wider. That way I can get a nice flat surface. I square up the ends using the little files and keep trying. It's always a couple strokes. Try it again, see how close I am. I go back and forth. This is actually a long process for me. I wish I could speed it up somehow, but it's the only way I know how to get a nice tight fit. And we're getting close, but you can still see we got a little bit to go. So one of the things when you're filing you have to be worried about is rocking the file back and forth. And that's where I use this vise and the jaws of the vise to ensure I'm going flat, using it from the front and the back to make sure I'm not rocking the file as I drag it through the copper. Then as I get close, what I do is take the ends and I round them over just like the tang. We don't want a nice square corner going from the tang to the blade. So I've got a nice little radius. Now I have to round over the guard so that it fits up nice and snug. And at this point, I'm only going to get close. It's because I've got to sand off some of the front of it to polish it up. I don't want to go make a perfect fit, sand it off and not. So as long as I'm close, I'm good enough at this point. I scratch in the shape of the guard and then it's over to the sander. One of the things that I really hate about copper is how fast it heats up. It is a great heat sink and it's cold out, but man, talk about toasty on the fingers at times. And here's what happens when you buy cheap belts. Thought I'd try some just to see what they were like. Definitely not worth the money. I'll swap the belt, continue to sand, and then to put in the curves, I'm going to flip the sander on its side and use a small wheel. With the guard done, next we need to now create a spacer behind it, and we're going to do that out of copper as well. So it's really repeating the process just like we did for the guard, milling in a slot. And back to the files. I'm wearing gloves today because it's really cold in the shop. I think it's minus 28 outside. I might have the shop up to minus 10, but we get a nice fit up. Next, we're going to take 2 pieces of black micarta to go between the copper and the handle. And it's really repeating the process one more time, except micarta, I can just use the Dremel. With a couple pieces of black micarta cut up and ready to fit, now it's time to add the handle. I'm going to use this block of acrylic. It's black with flashes of copper and silver running through it. I think it's really going to accent nice. One of the things I have to do is angle the end of it so that it matches up. And I kind of changed my mind here. I was going to do a hidden tang, and I've decided I'm going to actually do a through tang now. So we're going to end up welding on a piece here a little bit later. With the initial angle set on the block, now I'm going to mark it up and take it over to the mill again. That way I can get a hole going all the way through. But the first thing I'm going to do is actually use the same end mill that I used for the copper. And I'm going to try and go down as deep as I can. That should help keep some alignment for the drill bit as it goes through. And yeah, my first time using acrylic, um, not a not one of my favorite materials. It tends to melt, and all that white stuff you're seeing, it sticks together. Once it gets hot, it sticks together, and you got a real mess on your hands. And you can see, even with having a nice starting hole, I did get a little bit of drift at the end. Not much, but a little bit. I think the milling helped. And just like all of the other pieces, it's back to the files, clearing out all of that. The only nice thing is acrylic does file reasonably quickly. And you can see I'm already through. Now it's a matter of filing it to shape. So we'll finish up the hole, but then, like I said, I changed my mind. I wanted a through tang instead of a hidden tang because I want to put some copper on the end of this. I want it to be balanced. So I'm using the TIG welder here to just weld on a tail piece that's going to go all the way through. Then I'm actually going to TIG weld in a little bit of threaded rod. I'll go over to the grinder because that's how I fix all of my welds, and I get a nice smooth piece. Next, I'm going to cut it to length and then use a little bit of 1024 threaded rod to cut into that tang. So I'll mark the center of it, cut out a notch, and then again back to the TIG welder to weld in that 1032 rod. I've used a little bit of leather just in case there is any splatter, but I find with the TIG welder I don't get very much splatter at all. Plus I get nice concentrated welds, especially on things like a knife blade. We'll do up a test fit of all of our handle pieces, and it's starting to look good. I've got just a nut on the back of it to hold it all together, but now it's time that we start shaping the handle. But before we do that, we've got to put in some alignment pins. And these pins are going to make sure that everything stays exactly where they need to. So I'm just using 1/8 inch steel rod for the pins, and I'm drilling in 2 holes. I've got everything clamped up together. The pins will slide through and everything will fit. Then we have to transfer those over to the block. So I've got it all assembled. I've sharpened the ends of the pins, and I'm just driving the block onto the pins to get an alignment point. Next, I'm actually going to mark the angle with which those pins are going to go into the block. So I'll make a couple lines just to make sure that that's the angle I'm drilling down at. And now it's just starting to shape the handle. I'm going to first of all square it up and use, just like we do in blacksmithing, square octagon round. So I've just got some guidelines on the shape of the handle, and we'll just start hogging off material. Again, everything's held together with those alignment pins, but we have to really watch. We've got acrylic that's very sensitive to heat, and then we've got copper, which seems to soak up the heat. Looks like I had some friends wondering what the heck all the noise was about. To add the little half circles on the guard, what I've done is marked out where it needs to go. I've angled my table at 45 degrees, and now I'm just using the face of the guard and holding it flat against the table and then running it up into the 3/4 inch wheel until I touch my marks. With the front of the guard shaped up, I'm going to assemble it all together, and again, using the small wheel, I'm going to come in and put in that little front finger well, round off the top, put some shape to the side of the copper, and just basically get everything shaped up. And then I'm going to take a break here because I'm pretty excited about this. I've got the delivery of 800 pounds of propane for the shop now. I'm going to do another video on this, just on how I can now have unlimited propane. Now we need a pommel nut, and for that I'm using just a piece of scrap copper. I'm going to drill a hole in it and tap it to match the 1024 thread that we welded onto the tang. I put the tap in the drill chuck first. That way I'm sure that it's going straight down into the hole, and then finish it by tapping it in manually. So I cut off a bunch of the copper, and I had this brilliant idea of using the lathe. I threaded in some 1032 rod, and I didn't want to get too close to the chucks, so I chucked it out a little bit. This was a bad idea. You'll see it, just as I'm facing it, it bends the 1032 rod. So it seems like we're going good, where I'm knocking off just a little bit on the face, and then all of a sudden, there we go, it's bent right over. So we'll take it out. I'm gonna try it one more time on a different piece of rod, where I actually put the piece right up against the chuck. Hopefully that'll give it a little bit of stability. Turned out it worked okay. I still had to cut a little bit off, so that was fine. So with no place to bend, I faced it off, and then I started rounding it off, and then I tapered the back half. I was really careful to make sure that I wasn't driving into the chucks here. I probably had 1 or 2 thou. Good thing I had a stop set. With the basic shape turned down, the copper was rough, probably my milling technique, but I just took a file to it, smoothed it all off, and then a little bit of sandpaper, and we had a pommel nut. And just like before, when I had actually turned down the width so that it wasn't supported by the chucks very much anymore, it bent too. And so this is just a bad idea. I'm not going to do this again. I'll take it over to the 2x72 to clean it up a little bit more. I think right now we're at a 220 grit, just to give it a little bit of shine. And with all the parts made, time to glue it up. When I epoxy this together, what I'm going to do is use a little bit of stone color in the epoxy, just so that it matches the handle itself. That way, when I'm spreading the epoxy, if there's any gaps, it will be filled in with the same color of epoxy. You don't need much, just a little bit. That's probably too much, but stir it around and it starts to work good. So we'll smear epoxy everywhere. We'll put on the first pieces, add the alignment pins, make sure that they're stabbed in really good, and then the handle, putting epoxy everywhere again. And you can see it's actually squeezing out as I put on each piece. So I know I've got good penetration. I'm wiping it off as I go. Pretty happy with how this one's coming together. And with everything all screwed together, I don't need clamps because that pommel nut is just squeezing the heck out of everything, forcing all the pieces together. I'll wipe it up with a whole bunch of acetone, making sure I've wiped off the epoxy from everything, and then let it cure up. Once it's set, it's back to the grinder, this time working up in grits, starting at 120, working my way all the way to 800, and then finishing off with some hand sanding, especially in that around the guard. And I love the way this one turned out. The copper accents, highlighted by the copper guard, the little flashes of copper in the handle itself, all work together to make a beautiful knife. If you do like these, let me know. Hit that subscribe button, ask any questions you need in the comments, and I'll be happy to answer them.
Blacksmith, blacksmith, forge me a blade of the strongest steel, that when I strike my enemies, their wounds may never heal. Blacksmith, blacksmith of your blade, legends there shall rise, for the blade that you will forge for me will deliver us from the night, the night.